Hi there, and welcome to Ian's Engage channel. I'm Ian. In a previous video, I finally got the majority of my track plan laid down as track, and in this video, I'm going to install the DCC bus, add dropper wires to the track, power everything up, and get a train running. Yes, you heard me right, an actual train will be running by the end of this video. Right, so at time of recording, I was still waiting for a left-hand curved point to arrive. They were like hen's teeth to source at the moment, so as it didn't look like it was going to arrive anytime soon, I bodged the outer loop using a piece of curved track instead. It's not ideal, and doesn't really fit correctly, but I've tried running some rolling stock over it, and they don't derail, so that's all good. This meant that it was time to add power to Shelfington. For the DCC bus wire, I'm using 16 AWG silicon-coated tinned copper wire, and I'd purchased a reel containing 10 metres of both red and black coloured wire. Unfortunately, the red and black wires weren't joined together, but as they would be going around the layout together, my first job was to remove the two lengths of wire from the reel and join them together using electrical insulation tape. This would definitely make it easier to handle as I installed it below the layout. Before I could install the DCC bus, I needed to drill a few holes into the baseboard where I could thread the bus wires through. Once the holes were made, I could go below the layout and install the wiring. I really didn't like being below the layout as my dodgy knees made it an uncomfortable experience for me, and it was a nightmare when it came to getting up again. However, the Model Railway Solutions baseboard I was using was a godsend when it came to fitting the bus wire. The holes in the cross bracing below the baseboard made the perfect supports for the wires, meaning I didn't have to mess about with alternative fixing methods, at least not at this stage. Next, I needed to add some dropper wires to the track. For these, I'd purchased some 22 AWG silicon-coated tinned copper wire and had 5 metres of both red and black lengths. I first determined where I wanted to add the dropper wires to the track and marked the positions onto the baseboard using a marker pen, making sure I avoided the cross braces below. Next, I installed a rather long 3mm drill bit into my drill and began to drill through the 60mm of XPS foam and the 12mm plywood baseboard. Once all of the drilling had been completed, a quick clean-up kept the workplace tidy. So now that the holes were in place on either side of each rail, I could cut some dropper wires to length. Unlike the wire I'd purchased for the DCC bus, the red and black dropper wires I'd purchased were joined together, so I first had to separate them, which was a simple enough job as can be seen here. Now, with regard to wiring, I quite like the mottos black to the back or red to the rear for remembering which rail to attach each wire to. However, neither of these made much sense when the track was in a loop, as the back rail at the rear of the layout became the front rail as the track looped around to the front of the layout. So, I was going to remember that black was for the outside rail and red was for the inside rail. Unfortunately, I don't have a catchy motto for that. Now, I had intended to solder each dropper wire to the side of a rail at the layout. However, I made a complete pig's breakfast of the first few attempts at doing this. I melted sleepers and used far too much solder, which resulted in unsightly joints and ugly track work. So, I ended up lifting the sections of track I wanted to add droppers to and took them to my workbench, otherwise known as my dining room table. The new plan was to solder the dropper wires to the underside of the rail, but this new plan didn't start out very promisingly either. However, after a few practice attempts, I came up with a process which I'll outline here. Okay, so first I prepared the track. Before I'd removed each track section, I'd marked the rail heads using a marker pen at the location that the dropper wires were to be fitted. I'd also attached a piece of tape to the rail that I wanted to attach the black wire to, in order to remind me which rail was which. Obviously, it was important not to mix up positive and negative feeds, and it was quite easy to forget which rail was which as you rotated the track and flipped it over. Next, I cut away the webbing between the sleeper directly below where I'd marked the rail, and also the webbing between the two adjacent sleepers. This allowed me to push each sleeper to one side, which left more of the underside of the rail exposed. This was a great help as I next added some solder to each rail where I was going to attach the wire, applying flux before introducing the solder. Next, I prepared the dropper wires by stripping about a centimetre of casing from the end of each wire. I then twisted each end and folded one of the ends back on itself to make a U-shape. I then tinned the U-shaped ends using some flux and solder. I then went around each of the dropper wires and soldered them to the underside of their associated rail, remembering to push the sleepers back into their original positions once completed. Finally, I used my GaugeMaster track tester and a 9-volt battery to determine if I had good connectivity between the dropper wires and the rails. The track sections were then transported back to the layout and refitted, with each dropper wire being inserted into the holes that had been drilled previously. The next job was to connect the other end of the dropper wires to the DCC bus. For this, I used lever nut connectors. I didn't film myself performing the connections, as it simply involved cutting the bus wire, stripping some of the wire off each end, and attaching them to the lever nut connector. So here's a few pictures and a short bit of footage of what the connections look like from below the layout. The next job was to mount my DigiKeys DR5000 onto the side of the 3-foot baseboard, where it would hopefully remain safe from being knocked accidentally, until I found a more permanent place for it. To complete the installation of the track power, the final job was to attach the DCC bus wire to the DR5000. So now we'd arrived at another major milestone in the construction of Shelfington. After powering everything up, I decided that it was only fitting to let my Class 33 have first run on the layout. As mentioned previously, although I'd laid almost all of the track, I still required a curved point to complete the outer loop properly. However, what I'd created was a good representation of the complete layout, and would be good enough for me to perform some operational testing until the new point arrived and I could continue track laying. So, finally, after 6 whole months of construction and experimentation, here's my Class 33 running along from where Platform 1 of Shelfington railway station will be, onto the inner loop, around the inner loop, then through Mantlethorpe station area, then back onto the inner loop, and finally into what will become Ledgetown Quarry Yard. Hurrah! Okay, so that's about it for this momentous update. If you've got any hints, tips, useful tools or techniques to pass on to a beginner in N-gauge modelling, or if you simply want to say hello, then please do so in the comments section. Anything and everything you've got to say will be greatly appreciated. In the meantime, thanks ever so much for watching. Hopefully I'll have another update sometime soon. Bye.